Hi, I'm Peter Nichols, Life Enjoyment Mentor. My business is enjoyment, my product is purpose. I help people connect with what they enjoy in their lives with what gives them purpose, at work, home and in community life. When you lose yourself in what you do, you enjoy, you find yourself. The real you comes alive. Typically in our early working years we focus on earning the money we need to establish ourselves and our families in life. I believe the second half of life is the richer half. Only when we have reasonably experienced adult life do we start to understand what makes us different as a person, what we are good at and what people value about us. We are ready to find our true north, serving causes that give us satisfaction and answer the question, why are you here? This is one of a series of interviews of people who explored their true potential, have seen the light and made significant and purposeful changes to enjoy a more satisfying life. Good evening from me and good morning to overseas and g'day. This is Peter Nichols, Life Enjoyment Mentor. This is the fifth of a series of interviews on the topic of the second half of life is the richer half. And I'm absolutely thrilled and somewhat a little bit awe, I've got to say, of the fact that our guest today is Carl Honore, who is incredibly well known. I've still got his book here of about, I think I bought that about 20 years ago, and it's still a Bible I've got there in praise of slow. But it is a book that I still refer to. Carl and I have been got to know each other quite a bit on LinkedIn. We've found a very common interest in this whole question of the ageing, on the benefits of ageing as distinct from all the problems of ageing. So we've met up on a number of things and decided that I was delighted that Carl agreed to this interview. But before we get on to that, let me just give you a short bio on Carl. Carl Honore is an award-winning writer, broadcaster and two-time TED speaker. His online keynotes have more than 10 million views. After working with street children in Brazil, he covered Europe and South America for The Economist, Observer, Miami Herald, Houston Chronicle, National Post, Canada, Time Magazine, and other publications. Published in 36 languages, his books have landed on bestseller lists around the world. His latest book, Bolder, explores how to make the most of the new longevity and was a BBC Radio 4 Book of the Week. His second TED Talk is called Why We Should Embrace Aging as an adventure, which I like that, really. That's a great theme. Carl was recently named as an advocate for aging by the American Society for Aging. Carl, welcome to the session today. It's really great to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm thrilled to be here.
Now, listen, before we get into anything too much, Carl, I think there's a fascinating connection we have, and that is that we've both been fighting the odds for some years. You in the area, first of all, of the area of slow in a world where speed is increasingly of the essence in the way we live, and also in the area of aging, in a world where the youth is still the way to go. In the public belief. And in my case, I've been battling the question of enjoyment in a world where the work ethic and of hard work, of stress being a badge of honour, doesn't recognise enjoyment and is still struggling to understand enjoyment to this day. So in a sense, I thought to myself in some ways, it's a bit like the theme song might be The Impossible Dream, or Mission Possible, or something like that. So I just thought that was a good way of looking why we've got so much in common. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it feels like we're fellow travelers. They're challenging the status quo from different angles, possibly saying very, very similar things, but maybe just using different words to say it.
Well, I'm going to ask you then to sort of give us a bit of the backstory about how you've got to where you are now, but with an emphasis, I suppose, on where you developed your passion for these sorts of unusual issues. I know I've got my own story. I'd be fascinated to hear where in your early days you first found yourself interested in these sorts of different aspects of life to those which people generally deal with, and that's what we've got in common.
Yeah, well, I suppose I've always had a curious streak. I think right from early on, I was someone who asked a lot of questions and wanted to look around corners and peek under stones. And that probably explains why my first chapter in my working life was as a journalist, right? So you're a professional questioner. And I always felt like right from the very beginning of that stage of my career, I was never fond of being part of the press pack and doing the press conference and covering what everybody else was covering. I always found myself drawn to the stories that were lurking in the shadows, that were just over the brow of the hill, just slightly out of view, slightly off kilter, a bit skewed from what other people were looking at. So I think when I look back now to where I am, from where I am to how I got here, I think that's been the through line. And I've always been, number one, curious, but also always looking to rotate the world just a little bit to see it from a slightly different angle. And so as a journalist, I did that and turned that into articles that could be anything from 500 words to, a few thousand. And then I guess I made the jump into writing books and giving talks, which is just another format for doing the same thing, which is asking questions and not always necessarily expecting a clear-cut answer, but hoping that that question will maybe lead to a better question, and that might lead to an even better question, and just getting people to put their way of thinking and their way of being in the world under a microscope and to question it, hold it up to the light, and see if we can do things better.
So how come slow? The one first, I think, was the slow one rather than the aging one.
Yeah. Well, what I realized when I made the jump from journalism to writing books is that now that I've got 4 or 5 books under my belt, I realized that each of them starts with some personal existential crisis. Something is going horribly wrong in my own life, and writing a book is a form of personal therapy in a way. It's a way for me to grapple with and reckon with what's going wrong and try to find a way to put it right. And so with Slow, which was my first big book, I've just literally found myself stuck in fast forward. So every moment of my day was a race against the clock. I just couldn't stop going fast. And I had a wake-up call, which was when I started reading bedtime stories to my son. And I was just so fast that I'd be giving him a speed reading version of Snow White. My take on Snow White was so fast that it only had 3 dwarves in it. I was jumping lines, paragraphs, whole pages. And my son knew these stories inside out, so he'd always catch me and say, "Daddy, why are there only 3 dwarves in the story? What happened to Grumpy?" And I could just feel that this was wrong. This is not how bedtime stories should be, but I couldn't stop. I just couldn't put on the brakes. And the moment of truth came when I caught myself flirting with a book I'd heard about called The 1 Minute Bedtime Story. So Snow White boiled down to 60 seconds. And I remember thinking, hallelujah. I need that book now from Amazon, drone delivery. But then I had a second thought, which was very different. It was real light bulb over the head stuff. And I just suddenly thought, whoa, what's going on here? I am racing through my life instead of actually living it. And that was when I pushed pause and began to take a step back and think, well, how did I get so addicted to speed? And am I alone in this vortex of rushing and hurry and overstimulation and distraction? And pretty quickly I realized, spoiler alert, that I wasn't, and that there was a different way of thinking about pace and time. And that was to reclaim slowness as a virtue, to understand that in a fast world, slowness is actually a superpower. And so that led me to write my first book, which just hit the ground like a grenade and just, I think, came at the right moment where people were beginning to feel ill at ease with this roadrunner approach.
About what year would that have been when you produced that book, first produced it?
Yeah, well, In Praise of Slow came out first in English in 2004. And I remember thinking at the time, just before publication, wow, there's nothing like this out there. I'm going to get eviscerated, right? I would just be crucified by this faster is better culture. But that just was the opposite of what happened. The day the book came out, I could just tell that right across the spectrum from, the business world to yoga teachers, everybody was saying, yes, phew, we need this, right? We've just got way too fast. We are turning every moment of the day into a dash to the finish line, and we're paying a heavy price in everything from our health to our productivity to our communities, to, and everything in between. So I think the book just landed at just the right moment, and because of that, it vaulted me into a position of what I'd never really sought out or expected to be, which was, I guess the phrase people use now is thought leader, right? Even though I've been someone who loves to write and share my thoughts and play with words, I've always tended to do that, or at least started out doing that in a very private way. So as a journalist, my byline would be out there in the world and my words, but that was it. I wasn't giving talks or putting things on social media. Whereas now that's part of what I do, is getting the message out through all these other channels. So same drive, but just different way of doing it.
Yes, certainly, because I started out with what I do now, 2003. So around that time, it seems to me that a lot of things did happen around the turn of the century. There seemed to be I often think that in many ways I stand in two different eras. One, born in the last century and now actively operating in the present century. Two almost totally different centuries. Just about when the time the century changed, the new century came in. I think there probably is a significance in that. It's mind you, apart from that, I actually quit full-time work in 2002, so I suppose there was a very personal impact in my life too around that time as well. But just going back to you telling stories to your children, I mean, that was a really favourite part of my life when my kids were small, and and particularly my daughter, who has a reading difficulty to this day with dyslexia. Absolutely idolised the time of reading stories, as did my son too. And you're right, that is there's a book written about the space in between, and in a sense, really, the day and going to bed is that space in between when you put the kids down and read a story at night. There was, I think, it's a very significant phase, and it's just interesting that was where you really start to think.
Yeah. It's funny because I thought that really was genuinely the spark for me to write the book. But when I sat down to write the book, I remember thinking, well, I can't really tell this story about bedtime stories. I mean, that's so niche. I mean, nobody's going to understand that unless they're currently a parent of small kids. But then I thought, well, no, I've just got to be honest about where this whole adventure started for me. So I went with it. And I realized right away that actually bedtime stories is something that we all have a relationship with, either as parents or grandparents, or we remember ourselves being read to as kids. And of course, human beings, we tell stories. We are storytelling creatures. That's how we express love. It's how we dissipate fear. It's how we build families. It's how we design our lives. It's how we make sense of the world. And so that's something that goes right back to our ancient ancestors huddled around a campfire in the savannah in Africa, all those hundreds of thousands of years ago, right? They were telling each other stories. And there's something about storytelling that is slow, right? The one thing you cannot do with a story, if you don't want to ruin it, is to speed it up, right? That's a shortcut to destroying the whole ritual. And ritual, I think, is the right word here, because storytelling is a kind of ritual.
Stories are ever will it be thus too. I think people, and we both know in the speaking scene, people just absolutely are riveted to stories, which have a relevance, of course. But yes, it's just something about, we just do love stories, and we all have a story. I think one of the things I used to worry about, the fact that I wasn't a celebrity, I didn't have any major catastrophe that got me into doing what I do. Just an ordinary bloke, and I used to worry that who would want to listen to my story. But then I found that people were saying, yeah, hey, I can relate to that. What you just happened, that happened to me. Something similar happened to me. And I found the relevance of everyday matters starts to have as big an impact as we have a famous one in Adelaide here, a guy who got shot 14 times in the police force and lived, and it's a remarkable story, Derek McManus. But, and I compared because I know Derek very well, through the speaking fraternity, and I used to think I could never compete with that, nor would you.
Yeah.
But I think that there's issues of slow aging, enjoyment. They're all day-to-day issues which we both have the task, I see, of trying to shift people's thinking about what
Yeah.
it's all about, rather than saying, "Hey, I found something new I need to tell you about." It's just shifting the thinking. Just a little bit about the name Honore. Background on that. That's somebody was fascinated when I mentioned your name. Was interested in the name Honore. What's the
Yeah.
background on that name?
Well, my father is from Mauritius, the little island off the coast of Madagascar, which has a lot of obviously French culture in it. So yeah, so that's where the name comes from. And he
Mm-hmm.
moved to study at the University of Edinburgh, where he met my mum, who is completely Scottish. They got married, and I was born in Edinburgh. And then 6 months later, we emigrated to Canada, which is why I sound like the way I do, carrying the Mauritian surname with a Canadian accent, and now living in London. So there you are, the global village.
No, I have a very dear friend who lives in Toronto, and it's Toronto. I know it well now, but I've never been there. uh, but it's yeah, and of course Australia and Canada have always had an amazing affiliation with each other too. I think
Yeah, I
it's
often feel like Australia is a bit very like Canada, but with warmer weather.
yeah, it's true. It's not at the moment, I've got to say. Certainly, I've got a pullover on there, and I've got the air conditioner going. We're in the depth of our, mind you, it's a fairly Mediterranean winter, so it's nothing to worry about. Look, I think on this theme, you mentioned to me a while ago you just recently turned 51, and I talk about the second half of life as the richer half. Would you go along with the fact that this is a second half, or would you break your life journey up into some other categories rather than first half? I talk about the first half being preparing for all preparations for life, getting your job, getting pay, getting a family, getting a mortgage, and then the second half you start to say, hello, this is who I really am, and I want to be different.
Yeah,
How do you see the division of where you're at?
that's an interesting question. Sometimes I think people dice up their lives in different ways. I mean, some people talk about the first and second half. Others like the 4 quarters. Some go by decade to decade. I think and depending on who I'm speaking to, I'll use all of those metaphors because sometimes you just want to be in sync with the person you're speaking with. But if I'm choosing the language, I think I probably would not use any of those, to be honest, that often. I tend to think of life as being an uninterrupted continuum.
Mm-hmm.
And let me give you a couple of metaphors for the way I think about aging, but living, because they're the same thing, ultimately, aren't they? The first is Michelangelo, the famous, obviously, Italian Renaissance artist. He talked about his job as a sculptor was to see the angel in the stone and set her free. So effectively what he's saying is his job is just to chip away gradually over time until you get to the core, you get to the heart of the matter. You release the truth at the center of things. And that's how I think about aging. It's a little bit like that David Bowie quote, who he once said that aging is an extraordinary process whereby you become the person you were always meant to be. And that's tends to be how I think about age, and whether you're 45, 55, 65, rather than sort of putting that in these little boxes, I just say you're on that road to setting the angel free. Another metaphor, which is a little bit more modern, but falls into the same scope, if you like, the same way of thinking about aging as being a long arc or a continuum, is I tend to think of aging as like a video game in a sense. I'm not a gamer at all, but the metaphor I think works well for me. So I'm actually, you said 51, actually 57 at the moment. So I think of that as being, that means that I'm at level 57, right? So I'm now at level 57. I will occasionally look back to level 29 and think, I had a great time then, but I don't want to slither all the way back to level 29. I have made it to level 57. I'm going to enjoy everything that happens in this level. I'm going to gather all the treasure, garner all the weapons, flirt with all the maidens, whatever it is you do in the game you're in. And then I'm looking forward to what level 58 holds. So that's kind of the sort of lens that I bring to aging, is thinking, where are you on that track? Are you level 51? Are you level 53? Are you level 41, 26? I'm happy to be 57. I'm intrigued to know what level 58 is holding for me, even level 60. What could 65 be as a level. So that's sort of how I think about aging. I think is less about boxing it off into halves or quarters or thirds and so on. Although I can appreciate that those can be helpful too.
It's interesting because one of the things I pick up very much from what you just said is you're forward looking into the future. Whereas there's this suggestion as we age, we tend to spend more time looking back. Whereas in fact, and I love that analogy about the Michelangelo chipping away so that you actually reveal yourself to yourself and to others as life goes on. Whereas you might have been this block of marble to start off with that people have tried very hard to shape you for you. Now you've been chipping away and it's increasingly revealing yourself. And I think that's a really good one. My analogy is we measure age in we measure age in years. We measure growth in depth of understanding ourselves and others, depth of perspective, depth of insight, and eventually depth of wisdom. But I think that's, and I like the idea that it's a process which we continue to look forward to. We have learned so much as each year goes by, which gives us so much more ammunition material to make something more of the future.
The next, exactly. I mean, I don't only look at the future. I think it is important to look at the past, and I think memory is a source of immense joy, solace, wisdom, hope. I mean, I think the one of the most tragic things that can happen to somebody is to lose their memory, right? I mean, to lose that sense of self. So I think it's very important, and is a big part of, I think, part of the joy that we feel in later life is the ability to look back fondly on earlier life, right? And of course, what we're always doing with memories, we're always editing. And this is one of the things, I mean, there's a lot of science that shows that we tend to get better in later life at focusing on the upside. We get a bit more glass half full, especially when we look to the past. And I think anyone who has got a few decades under their belt will recognize this phenomenon that you kind of rework stories from the past so that things that were pretty gruesome in the moment, they don't look quite so bad today. And the things that were good back then take on an extra shine. I mean, you add a little extra detail to the story in your own mind. Stories get better in the telling over the years and so on. So I think memory is a wonderful.
I like the Steve Jobs. I was often quote the Steve Jobs. You can't join the dots looking forward. You can only join the dots looking back. Because you're right. I mean, memory, thank you for mentioning it, because memory is a big part of the workshop I run with people, is the fact that I find people's richest memories in many ways around their adolescence, where, they had all the big plans for their future, and many of them got scotched by people who said, "Oh, you're never going to make a job out of that." But they learn and remember so much about what they were good at in those adolescent years, which they still use today. So yeah, memory, I think, is a wonderful part of it too. Some of the little things I mentioned, and it's more on the slow side a bit, but a couple of terms you used, I thought just a couple of words you might like to mention: hurrying versus living. And I thought even just being, there's a hurrying through life, there's living, and there's simply being. My theme is enjoy being you. So different, the trend in those words.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we place in our culture on a pedestal speed, busyness, activity, measurable productivity, all that stuff. And it means that we find ourselves rather than being human beings, we become human doings. So we look up to, we glorify, we venerate being busy. It's woven into our vernacular. You meet someone in the street and you say, "How are you doing?" They say, "Busy." And it's like, you don't even know how are you, it's just sort of, and if you're not busy, somehow you think, well, I'm falling down on the job here. I'm letting the side down. I'm wasting time because I'm not busy. But of course, that's completely the opposite and the wrong way to think about how to use time. It's not about cramming more and more into less than less time. It's about giving each moment the time and attention it deserves. And sometimes that moment will require you to roll up your sleeves and go all in and be active and firing on all cylinders. But other moments will require you to do something more gentle, to slow down, to be present in a way that is not, noisy and loud and driven by motion and all that. It'll just be it'll be kind of have a kind of stillness to it. And sometimes the best thing to do in the moment is to do nothing at all. It's just simply to be in the moment, whether you're gazing at a sunset or listening to a bird chirping in the trees or letting your mind wander as you sit in the park or whatever it is. Just being, or just being with your children in the kitchen and nobody's necessarily talking. You're tidying stuff. You're just being. You're just there together. I think in those, you talked about the in-between moments, those liminal moments. I think those are sometimes the most precious points in a lifeline. Are the things that actually at the time you think, well, nothing is happening here. But actually, when you take a step back and look more deeply, everything is happening there. The really important stuff is happening and unfolding and unfurling all around you. But because the culture is constantly saying, well, you got to do stuff that's loud, that's performative, that's going to look good on an Instagram reel, sitting still or just sitting on the couch with a loved one, that doesn't make for an exciting TikTok, right? And yet, it's what gives life meaning, texture, depth, purpose, all the good stuff.
And the younger you learn that sort of value, the less stressful and the more valuable life becomes. We think, look, once you get into the later years of life, you've got time to do that. Whereas when you're in the youth, you don't have time to do that. But exactly, it doesn't dismiss that the value of it is just as important in the younger years as in the older. I agree. Those are the magic moments, aren't they?
I'm so glad you said that, because people often ask me, what's the one piece of advice you would give to your younger self? And that is the piece of advice I would give, that slow down, right? You don't need to wait till you're older to slow down. In fact, you actually need to do it now, right? This is something that we all have skin in the game here, because this is whatever age you are, whatever stage of life you find yourself in, you need to be living each moment at the right pace, not turning it into a race against the clock. There's that, who is it? Was it the Dalai Lama or somebody a bit like that who said once, you should meditate for 1 hour a day. And if you don't have time for that, if you're too busy, meditate for 2 hours, right? And I think just a fun way of saying, actually, it's precisely at the moments when you think you ought not to slow down, that's when you most need to reconnect with your inner tortoise, right? And again, that's whatever age you are, because this is, because the culture is so drenched in the cult of youth, and youth is so often tied up with speed. We tend to think that slowing down is for older people, but let me tell you, I'm here to tell you today that it's really not. It's something that we all need. Human beings are not algorithms. We're not machines. We're not built to be always on, to be constantly stuck in turbo mode. We have lots of different speeds and gears and modes to play around in. And sometimes we need to slow things down. And that the earlier you can learn that lesson, the more you're going to thrive at every stage, and probably the longer and happier you're going to live as a result later on down the track.
I like the leadership concepts that are coming out in the modern era about the leader is the one who slows everything down and says, let's get the right decisions, rather than let's rush forward to find a quick answer. And it's often the leader who pulls everyone up and says, I suggest we all spend a day thinking about this one before we go rushing into what we think the answer might be. That's sort of, there's that philosophy. The other word you use is rushaholic. I love that, rushaholic. I mean, I stressaholics and workaholics, but rushaholic.
Well, I think it says something very true about the moment we're in now, which is that this whole speed culture, speedaholic culture, if you like, right? It has become a kind of addiction, right? So, I mean, even if you look at some of the science that's been done recently, if you take away people's mobile phones from them, they will have the same physical reaction as a drug addict will take if you take away their heroin fix, right? I mean, we have really literally reached the stage where we are chemically, emotionally, physically, metaphysically, philosophically addicted to being always on, to doing everything faster and faster, to doing several things at the same time, multitasking. I saw this awful expression recently, second screening. I don't know if you've come across this. It's this idea that people no longer watch a program, a movie or anything, looking at just the one screen. They're always looking at another screen at the same time, watching another thing or looking at social media, or so that this has now reached a point where the tail is wagging the dog. So producers of new Netflix series talk about the second screen effect. So they're making TV shows on the assumption that people won't be giving their full attention to them. They'll be looking at another screen, right? So even the art itself is being affected by this assumption that everybody must be juggling 9 things at the same time and not fully present and in the moment and rushing through every single second of the day. Not a good place to be as a culture, right? And yet here we are. So this is a big part of what I'm constantly chafing against and calling people's attention, is the fact that this is no way to get the most out of life. I mean, people often say to me, I can't slow down and life will pass me by. But actually, the opposite is true. Life is happening right here, right now. And the only way to make the most of it is to slow down into each moment. That's really a very simple truth. It's universal. It's always been there and is there for everyone, right? It's not something you need to pay a consultant to help you do or to download from an expensive website. We can all choose to slow down, right? It's there for everybody. But we've just got ourselves whipped up into this frenzy, this obsession, this self-talk that slow is for losers, right? Slow is boring, slow is roadkill. You can't slow down or you'll get left behind. Makes it hard for us to do it, the taboo against slowness. But once you start questioning the taboo and looking at the actual facts of what a life well lived looks like, it becomes a lot easier to take that first step down the road to something slower.
And you have to slow down your thinking to think that too.
Yeah, you mentioned the leader, because the leader you described there who says, hang on, let's push pause here. Let's not rush in where danger, where angels fear to tread and all that stuff. That's actually these days a fairly rare kind of leader.
I have a friend who spends most of the time consulting in the area of leadership, and her big battle is to get the leaders to be aware of the sorts of things we're talking about and this emotional intelligence. So I remember once in my early days saying that leaders are being dragged kicking and screaming to emotional intelligence classes. Can you foresee or even visualize now a swing of the pendulum towards this, what's the word, dash over the cliff into the stress and rush life where they start to realize that, hey, we just can't keep this up? Particularly the changing.
I do feel like the tectonic plates are shifting here and the pendulum is starting to swing. One data point that supports that argument is what's happening with the next generation. I mean, if you look at or speak to human resource people around the world, they'll tell you that the new generation coming to the workplace have a different ethos. They've got a different way of thinking about work. They're looking at my generation, your generation, where, we were nose to the grindstone. You just did what you had to do. You powered through all that sort of stuff. And they're saying, I don't really want that. I don't want to sacrifice my health, my dreams, my soul on the altar of what? Some kind of company that will just throw me out with a cardboard box, 6 months from now and say toodaloo. And they're saying, okay, I'm willing to work hard. I want to do well, but I also want to have a life. I want to go home and give my newborn baby a bath and read her a bedtime story. And if you don't let me do that, have a better balance, I will go across the street to a company that will let me do that, or I'll set up my own company, which you're seeing more and more young people setting up their own startups where they can have a more balanced life. I mean, they sometimes then get sucked into the whole hustle thing and it gets very fast. But the starting point, at least, is questioning the paradigm, which says faster is better, more is more in the workplace. So you see that's in the workplace, but right across the whole slow movement, whether it's in slow travel, slow art, slow education, it's young people, it's 20-somethings who are really taking the lead in redefining pace and questioning this whole faster is better culture. So I think that we will turn this super tanker around. We won't do it next week or next year, but I think we will do, and not least because we have to, because we're bumping up against the limits of what human beings and the planet can take in terms of speed. We, look all around us, whether it's climate change or the falling apart of a global economy in various ways. Things are fraying. Democracy itself is falling apart at the seams. The system built on speed has got us to a point where the world is broken. And I think people realize that now. Yeah. I think people realize that of all generations. And that's why you're starting to see pushback, you're starting to see redefinition. And I think out of the mess that we're in at the moment will come something that you might call slow. I see that as a useful lens for redefining the next big chapter in the human story.
You raise an interesting point there that about the terminology that I use these days, and I suspect you do, and from what you're saying, you too. You have to find the terminology that gets away. For instance, with the word slow, has this immediate perception of tortoise. And I know you talk the tortoise within, which is an interesting topic, but this sense of being, slow is negative, where in fact it's not. It's actually it has its role in place, but we have to find words with. For instance, if I'm trying to sell enjoyment, I had to talk about work-life balance. I had to talk about stress management. I had to talk about transitions, all these things which are real-life issues, and how enjoyment fits into that. And I guess the issues of slow and the issues of aging need to fit in with the way the world is going.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that I've been wrestling with for 20 years now, is the word slow, right? How it lands with people. I mean, we've come a long way. I think at the beginning, people were still hearing the word slow and immediately defaulting to the assumption that it meant lazy, boring, unproductive, unmodern, getting left behind, and so on. I think that has shifted. I think that now people are much more open to the idea of slow. Yesterday I was looking at the back cover of a magazine, and it had a huge ad by Patek Philippe, the famous watch brand. I think their catch line is something like, "You don't own a Patek Philippe, you look after it for the next generation," right? So it's the idea of these carefully, beautifully crafted watches that last forever. And the strap line for this new ad campaign was something like, "Faster is not better." And it was talking about the importance of slowing down for thinking, designing, crafting, putting together the perfect watch, right? And I tell you, I don't think a company would have used that kind of language. I was going to say 10 years ago, probably even 5 years ago. So it does show that there's a seismic shift going on, even in the words we use, in the vernacular that people deploy around the business space, around their private lives, everywhere. I think slow is becoming more acceptable. But again, I still find myself, when people say, "Well, explain the slow movement," saying, slow is not all about doing everything very slowly. I mean, that would be absurd, right? I'm certainly not an extremist of slowness, right? Faster sometimes is better. I mean, often it's better. It's often the best way to go. But the slow revolution is really about finding the right pace or the right speed for the moment. Musicians have a wonderful expression. They talk about the tempo giusto, the right tempo for each piece of music. And that sort of gets at what slow is about. It's about finding, sure, if there's a moment here to speed up, and then other moments you want to slow down. If you go deeper, slow, it's a mindset. It's quality over quantity. It's being present in the moment. It's doing one thing at a time. It's really ultimately about doing everything not as fast as possible, but as well as possible. So and once you start explaining that to people, they think, yeah, I get that. That resonates in my office, my factory, my family kitchen, my gym. I can see how that applies, that principle applies across the board. But you still do have to do a bit of linguistic lifting to explain to people, because there is, for some people, still the idea they hear slow and immediately think, "Oh, can't do that," right? That's for when I retire, or that's for other people who are slow. So there is still a bit of a hump to get over, language-wise.
In what you've just been saying there, Carl, is a bit of, I found myself only in the last year adding the word purpose, that in my business is enjoyment, my product is purpose, to actually try and fit where enjoyment fits into the bit. And I'm thinking slow, I can see slow having you're looking at slowness to achieve an outcome, to achieve some sort of purpose that you're not going to get by rushing and going fast all the time. There's got to be a rationale behind it that says that's why it's important in modern life. If I just actually add on one thing, the other thing, the word in my stuff, enjoy, I think of words like enhance, embrace, or not embrace, but encompass, the ones that add to. And when I start saying what adds joy to your life, suddenly becomes a different meaning of the word enjoyment than hardy-ha, good fun this weekend, which is important, of course. But so I'm forever a bit like you, finding ways of getting the word to have some sense of relevance in people's minds, ready relevance.
Yeah, I suppose what often happens for me is that I end up talking about slow as a tool. It's a magic wand, it's a talisman, it's a lever you can pull to get to the place you want to get to. So whether it's slowing down in order to find your purpose, whether it's slowing down to fire up pleasure and enjoyment, whether it's slowing down to forge deeper bonds and connections with the people who matter to you most, whether it's slowing down to reflect, see the big picture, join the dots, and do some really useful deep, it becomes, in a sense, the center of a Venn diagram, or it becomes the hub at the center of all these spokes that slows this thing you've got in your back pocket, where you just say, okay, I'm going to slow down into this moment and milk it for all it's worth, right? Get the most out of it. And sometimes you'll be looking for pleasure. Sometimes you're looking for productivity. Sometimes you're looking for deep human meaning and bonding, whatever it is, but slow is the through line, if you like. So that's sometimes another way that I approach the subject with people.
We're running close to the end of time. This always happens when you get a really good discussion going, but I'm interested to get your view on as you're 57, you're well into you've moved well into that second half of life, whether that's a good way of putting it or not. What are you finding is mattering most to you as your life moves along? What matters more these days to you?
Well, I think there's a couple of words for this. They talk about gerotranscendence, and I can't quite remember what the other one is. But effectively, it's this phenomenon that experts have identified across all cultures and socioeconomic groups, is that as people get into the second half of their lives, let's say sort of 40, 50, and so on, a shift occurs. They begin to look beyond their own narrow interests and gratification, and you want to be of service. You want to give back. You want to be part of something bigger than yourself. And I think you can feel that at any age, and I definitely have felt it all the way through my life. But I feel it more acutely, definitely now that I'm in the second half. I feel that I'm less inclined to want to invest time and energy in status games or scoring points or getting this or getting the other. And I'm really front loading the other side of that equation, which is what am I going to leave behind? What kind of ripples can I send out into the world? How can I leave the world a better place than I found it? And I think that different scope, that different engine that drives you in the second half of your life is part of what explains, I think, the famous U-shaped happiness curve that I'm sure you've talked about in the podcast or with the idea that we human beings follow this happiness curve where start high in childhood, fall steadily till we bottom out in middle age, then we bounce back up again, so that the adults are reporting the highest levels of life satisfaction and happiness of the over 50s. And there are, various theories to explain that, but I think one of them is that we get out of our own heads a little bit. We get out of our own selfish aggrandizement that can sometimes drive a lot of what we do in earlier years, and we sort of open up to the world and we show up in a different way. And I think that's one of the things that I'm enjoying most about this stage, is feeling, I'm looking always now for ways to plant that oak tree that I will never be around to sit under, for something later on, leaving something behind that's become much more center for me than it ever was before.
Oh, look, that's a tremendous philosophy, and I agree wholeheartedly. And I guess clearly I'm a few years ahead of you at the moment, and I think that's becoming the idea of legacy, of giving back what I've learned over the years, is much more important. Certainly earning money is not important anymore to me. Not that I'm terribly wealthy by any means, but I managed to live within my own income, such as I have, and I'm much more concerned about giving back to what I feel I have learned in any way that is possible, which is a battle in itself, because not everybody wants to be taught. In fact, you don't learn by being taught. You learn by curiosity and wanting to know. And I guess I find now it's more about keeping people curious. I think my philosophy these days is stay hungry to learn, stay curious to understand, and stay gently challenged, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah. I mean, we started out this conversation talking about the curiosity that drove me as a young person into journalism and so on. And I think curiosity is a superpower. I mean, it's the thing that keeps us cognitively, physically fresh and fit all the way through our lives. If you keep an open mind, if you're always doing as I've always sought to do, which is to look around that corner, open that new door, peek under that, exposing yourself to novelty at any stage, even if it's just trying a new recipe a couple times a week or visiting a website you might not normally get your news from, just to get out of that comfort zone and to be open and alive to the world. That's going to fire you up in the here and now, but it's also a wonderful investment for later on, because it means you're going to live better for longer, right? I mean, there's a lot of that. I mean, I've got somewhere on, my website, sort of, 12 rules for aging boldly and so on. And I think positive memory serves as number one is stay curious, right? Keep asking questions, stay fresh, stay open-minded and that kind of thing. And that's a good place to start.
Well, actually, I was just going to say, is there anything that we didn't discuss that you think is important to contribute to this? Any last thoughts of that we may not have touched on?
Well, gosh, I mean, we've touched the surface. The one thing that we didn't touch on that we could just throw in now possibly is the importance, and this pulls together a lot of what we've been talking about, maybe, is the importance of multi-generational living, getting out of your age bubble and being in groups of people who are of different ages. That is a wonderful way to enrich society, right? We know, I mean, and it's good in businesses because multi-generational teams perform better on every metric. But it's also very, very good for the way it's part of that curiosity thing. It's keeping you open to what life is like at different stages. We know that being exposed to people of different ages helps to take down age stereotypes, opens our minds. Suddenly everybody who's 23, if you have no contact with them, it's easy to believe that they're all, social media obsessed snowflakes, right? I mean, all these awful stereotypes that float around. But as soon as you start mixing and spending time with people of different generations, you realize that we have much more in common across the ages than the opposite. And that helps. Well, that's great for just joy and being alive and part of society, but it also helps you feel better, I think, about your own place on that great arc and continuum of life, especially if you have people who are older than you. I mean, I find this a really helpful thing, is having a pantheon of role models who are 15, 20 years older than me, and think, wow, I'm 57 now. It's not game over. It's not all downhill from next birthday, right? There are many things to look forward to. And if you have people, if you move in multi-generational circles, and some of the people who are further down the track can be role models in some way or another, that also lifts your spirits, lifts your horizons, and enriches your future, right? Because you start to think, yeah, okay, when I'm 74, I can do that. I can look forward at 82 to be doing this, and that just changes the whole dynamic, the whole energy around the moment now, and also what's waiting for you down the road. So mix it up.
It's been an absolute pleasure discussing with you. It wasn't an interview; it was a good chat about matters that we're both passionate about, and I am sure that our eventual watchers and listeners will gain a great deal out of your words today, and I very much appreciate your time. Carl, thank you. We look forward to keeping in touch one way or the other, and I'll look and enjoy the rest of your day. I now have other things to do this evening, but enjoy the rest of your day. And good to talk to you, Carl. Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much. It was a lot of fun. Can I just throw in one final thing here?
Yeah, sure.
If anyone wants to sort of follow up on anything, I've got books, tips, videos, everything in one place. It's just my full name, carlhonore.info, carlhonore.info, or inpraiseofslow.com. Either of those will take you to Linktree, every single link in every direction of everything I've ever done. So it's all there in one place.
I meant to give you that chance. Thank you. That slide. You're quite right.
There in the end.
My question would have been, how can people get in touch with you? And I guess you just answered that beautifully. Thank you. And that's a wrap. I hope you found this discussion to be of value to you. Until next time, make sure you enjoy being you.